This is a move that has been in the making since the month of October. You cannot be the reason why idiot analysts on television think that Minnesota has a great pass rush, when really they just played two of the worst offensive lines in the Big Ten Conference in Michigan State and Nebraska. And Nebraska being one of those teams meant that changes need to be made. With a 7-5 record, going under on their preseason win total of 7.5, the offensive line being the primary reason why Dylan Raiola kept getting hurt over and over and over again as the season went on, being the reason why Nebraska lost a vast majority of their games. The defense also played into that too, and we saw what happened to John Butler. This was a necessary move, even if it results in Dylan Raiola transferring out. Before we dive into some horrific numbers behind Donovan Raiola's offensive lines at Nebraska, some damning numbers, and talk about his likely replacement, Geep Wade, sources have confirmed to Husker Online that he is being hired as Nebraska's offensive line coach. I'm going to try to get ahead of that. Maybe it won't happen, but I'm pretty confident given the optics of those two jobs, Nebraska being in the Big Ten, Georgia Tech being in the ACC, Nebraska having a big financial commitment to football. Georgia Tech is trying to do that, but they don't have the resources. I'm pretty sure that move is going to be made. But before we get to all of that, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Do all of those things and comment your thoughts down below on this move and how you would feel if Nebraska hired Georgia Tech offensive line coach Geep Wade. How do you feel about that move? They fired Donovan Raiola, and within an hour, it sounds like they already have his replacement. So I saw some people talk about, mostly on social media, about how this might be a mistake, where if you lose Donovan Raiola, you lose Dylan Raiola, and that maybe they are a package deal, or that the offensive line improved as the season went on, or even it's not so bad. It's rare. A lot of people want him fired, but I have seen some pushback here. Nebraska, I know, is only 40th in havoc rate allowed, and a lot of that usually has to do with trench play. An 11.8% havoc rate allowed, that's 40th. However, a big part of the reason that your tackles for loss allowed are lower than they are, and that the sack numbers have improved since the month of October, are because TJ Lateef is a much more mobile quarterback who, like a lot of young quarterbacks, typically likes to panic and quickly escape the pocket when he doesn't exactly feel comfortable. That's often something that leads to sack avoidance, but isn't a good thing. Number two, Emmett Johnson has a wonderful set of juke moves, is powerful, always falls forward, and seemingly always has gas in the tank. His tank is never empty. And that can help mask deficiencies in run blocking. And indeed it has. Did you know that since 2022, when Donovan Raiola started his tenure at Nebraska as their offensive line coach, Nebraska has only had 3 offensive linemen listed on the all Big Ten teams. There's an honorable mention team, which is really like the 4th team, the 3rd team, 2nd team, and 1st team. And you have 5 slots. So out of 20 players listed across 4 seasons, so that's 60 players, and depending on how the votes are split, I think sometimes it can be a little bit more, a little bit less, but typically it's around 60. Only 3 Cornhuskers, less than 1 per year, have made the list. They are Ben Scott, Bryce Benhart, and Rocco Spindler. One is a transfer from Notre Dame, who was developed well at Notre Dame, coached by an elite offensive line coach in Joe Rudolph. The only reason he's on here is because he was developed at a high level and has adequate size and was healthy enough so that Nebraska's bad situation didn't ruin him as a player. The other 2, and Bryce Benhart, and Ben Scott. Ben Scott was a transfer as well entering 2023 from Arizona State. The other in Bryce Benhart has been around the program for a while, had tremendous upside, suffered a few injuries, unfortunately, but he only made the honorable mention list. That's it. 2 transfers out of 3 honorable mention Big Ten offensive linemen over the span of 4 seasons. And keep in mind, Nebraska, they recruit at the top of the old Big Ten West, and they recruit at around the level of Washington right now, say. I know that Washington just signed a top 15 class. Nebraska was outside the top 100, but usually in the 2020s, both of those teams have recruited at, I think, about a similar level. So think about it this way. Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, USC. Those teams are definitively ahead of you in the recruiting pecking order. After this year, I'd probably say Washington is too, with how they've been recruiting. That still leaves 12 teams, and you should be that 7th team. You should be. You should be in recruiting, if you're Nebraska, like 7th. Maybe 6th, but I'm going to say 7th because your recruiting area, the areas surrounding Nebraska and Lincoln, just isn't as plentiful with high-caliber players, at least on the surface, as the West Coast or the Midwest or the East Coast or some of those southern schools that Ohio State and Oregon and a little bit now Michigan and USC have pipelines in. And when it comes to offensive line play, you are not 7th in the Big Ten. Oregon is superior. Iapani Lololu, Isaiah World, Alex Harkey, Dave Uli, Emmanuel Pregnon, all of whom would be your best offensive linemen. That's their starting 5. Iowa's is better than yours. Trevor Locke, Jennings Dunker, Logan Jones. Their entire offensive line also would, like, no matter who you select, would have your best offensive lineman. Michigan, maybe not to the same extreme, but a similar story. Ohio State, not to the same extreme, but a similar story. Indiana, with healthy Pat Coogan, Bray Lynch, Drew Evans, Carter Smith, Khalil Benson. Any of their 5 is your best offensive lineman. We can go even further. USC had tons of injuries in the O-line and a former walk-on at center. Their offensive line is better than yours. Penn State, veteran group, Nick Dawkins, Olivega Ione, Anthony Dunco, Drew Shelton, Nolan Rucci. You saw that when they faced off. That Penn State's O-line is a million miles ahead of where Nebraska's is. Minnesota this year, their offensive line was pretty bad. One thing they could at least do for most of the year was do an adequate job protecting the passer. And they didn't have Emmett Johnson, because Emmett Johnson, shout out to a Nebraska friend of mine, LSU via SFAR, for pointing out preseason that Emmett Johnson's better than Darius Taylor. Like, he's right. Or maybe Minnesota's run blocking O-line is that bad, but I'm inclined to think that Emmett Johnson is better based on the film that I've seen. And you have other schools, for example, like Vanderbilt, who have better offensive lines than you do, despite not having the recruiting chops. BYU has a better offensive line than you do. Texas Tech went out and purchased some offensive linemen, but also kept part of their core, similar to what Nebraska did, and their offensive line, despite not being perfect, is much better than Nebraska's. Cincinnati, a team you played in week 1 if you're the Cornhuskers, has the far superior offensive line. In fact, their offensive line coach, before it was announced that Geep Wade is likely to succeed Donovan Raiola, was on my short list of candidates for who should be Nebraska's next offensive line coach. I don't have any graphics to display. I don't have any candidates to name. It sounds like there already is a candidate. We already know how bad Nebraska's offensive line is if you've watched this channel. It was ugly, to say the least. And I went on that long tirade and almost ramble because It's necessary to describe how bad Nebraska's trench play is. They are small, they lack physicality, they lack athleticism. There's not a togetherness with the unit, there isn't discipline within the unit. Their most talented prospects are worse than they were at their previous destinations, outside of maybe Elijah Pritchett, who is still pretty bad at Alabama. It's it's ugly. And Nebraska needed to make a change. I credit Matt Rhule for making that change. Geep Wade, meanwhile, you won't see a lot of his players on the all ACC team, but they do have some good ones. Keelan Rutledge, for example, is a fantastic offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman for Georgia Tech. Haynes King has really helped the system, same with running back Jamal Haynes. But Brent Key is a former offensive lineman himself, offensive line coach at Alabama, and then for Georgia Tech. The fact that he has employed Geep Wade for now 3 seasons, and the fact that Georgia Tech, when you look at havoc rate, Nebraska's 40th there, Georgia Tech is 17th in havoc rate allowed. Georgia Tech has a 46.2% rushing success rate, and that is 14th. Nebraska, meanwhile, in terms of rushing success rate, and keep in mind, this is puffed up by Emmett Johnson being an absolutely incredible running back, is 23rd. And Nebraska averages fewer yards per carry than Tech. Tech, honestly, I'm going to confirm this, some live research here, but intuitively, I think they've played a tougher schedule. Nebraska hasn't played anyone at Georgia's caliber all season long. I know Colorado isn't good this year, but Tech had to play them on the road. Tech, they've faced some tough schedules. They've played SEC teams. They've played Notre Dame before, with Geep Wade as the O-line coach, with Brent Key as the head coach. Offensive line has always been their primary mode of attack. Always. Nebraska, the Cornhuskers have the 50th toughest strength of schedule. Georgia Tech is the 67th. So my intuition was wrong there. But they're within a similar ballpark. And I've seen Georgia Tech murder opposing fronts, even ones that are very talented, with slow, methodical football. And Key knows how to recruit and develop offensive line. Geep Wade is a veteran who has helped Georgia Tech build up and get better year over year over year. This year, the reason why Tech wasn't in the ACC title or playoff picture was because of their defense. Their offense did not have much to do with that. Their offense was, I would say, in a lot of ways, spectacular this year. So I think while this wouldn't be, knock the baseball out of the park hire, wouldn't be an A+ hire, it's certainly an upgrade over what Donovan Raiola was to Nebraska. And as for recruiting, Nebraska, with where they're located, is never going to be this elite recruiter, I don't think. But what they have an edge with is the Midwest and the North. I mean, really the South too. But you can find good physical trench players almost everywhere if you're willing to develop and you look hard enough. And Nebraska has money. They can buy players, probably not buy top 5 classes or top 10, at least consistently. Maybe the 2027 class will be that level. But they need development. And if they just have a developmental edge and they're a good developmental program, they will be competing for the playoffs here and there, if not consistently. Remember, they don't have to play Ohio State or Oregon or Indiana or Penn State or Michigan or USC or any of those top programs every year. Their yearly rivalry is with Iowa, who, much like them, is kind of an above average good Big Ten program. So for the Cornhuskers, Geep Wade is a good hire. He'll develop this offensive line at a high level. Georgia Tech has allowed the fewest sacks in 2024, 2023, and 2025 in the ACC. And they have led the ACC in rushing during his tenure. They have recruited at a high level. They got a 5-star offensive lineman in the 2025 recruiting class. So I think that he just in a recruiting way, in a developmental way, in a scouting way is an upgrade in all three phases over Donovan Raiola. That's a very good thing. As for how this impacts Dylan Raiola and his decision, just shrugging my shoulders there because I don't exactly know. But Raiola has not announced yet any intention to enter the transfer portal. And I think that with how bad of a job Donovan Raiola has done and how many hits Dylan took from his offensive line, I can't imagine if he's thinking through things clearly that he would take that very personally. Is it sad to see a relative of yours get fired? Of course it's sad. I imagine that Raiola, Dylan Raiola, feels bad for his uncle. But at the same time, when you're getting hit like that and you're constantly under pressure and under duress and you're playing a game of football and you're getting paid millions of dollars, and look, Donovan Raiola's been on the staff for 4 years. They, gave him some grace when even last year and the year before there were some inconsistencies. I can't imagine he's too furious at Nebraska, Donovan Raiola, and I can't imagine that Dylan Raiola is taking this like a personal attack on his family. I imagine he views this, regardless of whether or not he leaves or stays, as business as usual. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's the sport of football. There are hard decisions that have to be made. This was a hard decision that Matt Rhule had to make, and I think it's a great one. Donovan Raiola out, Geep Wade in. Now we have to see who Nebraska is going to hire as their next defensive coordinator. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.